Every year I get to summarize 365 days worth of work by 50 employees and all of our partners and our clients and everything else in half an hour, or at least Kelsey asked me to keep it to half an hour. And so it's an impossible task, but so because of that, I am just gonna skip through this pretty quickly. Think of this as, I'm just gonna kind of touch on a lot of really interesting things that we've done through the last year. If something piques your interest, and something should, talk to me, talk to any of our LabKey team about what you see and get more information. So I will start with kind of like what Michael did, talking about the community investments that we make. We invest in, you are the community, and we every year invest a huge amount of our effort into making the community better, making the community edition better, making the open source platform better. Again, there are hundreds and hundreds of stories that went into the community edition. These are just a few, but they're kind of the ones that I wanted to point out and make sure that you didn't miss when you're reading all those release notes and everything else, or playing with new versions as they came out. So that top one, hosted trial and on-premise VM evaluation. So what that means, so for a long, long time, we've had this Windows installer. This is basically a Windows executable file that you can download to your Windows machine to install and evaluate LabKey. There's some problems there. Some of you don't have Windows machines. A lot of people out there don't have Windows machines. You have Macs or Linux. And it's installing all of these components across your PC. We wanted to do something better. So these are two improvements on that to give other folks who are interested in LabKey the ability to evaluate LabKey, to run LabKey, their own instance of LabKey in a much easier way. So we've done two things. One is we've made it very easy to click a button on our website and fire up your own private instance of LabKey server in the cloud, running in AWS. That's kind of our primary and our encouraged method of evaluating LabKey. The other option, if you happen to need to evaluate LabKey within your own institution, in your own data center, let's say you're connecting with systems in your data center, or you're dealing with PHI, or some other reason you don't want to evaluate LabKey in the cloud, we, as of 18.3, have a VirtualBox image that you'll be able to download and install locally within VirtualBox, fully functioning, already configured version of LabKey that you can use for evaluation purposes. In the functionality side, the actual product side of things, we made a bunch of improvements to study and folder import. A couple of those things, the ability to now load archives of data from XLS files, from Excel files. It used to be just text-based formats that we would load. Perhaps more interestingly, you have the option of inferring schema changes. So as we're importing data into, say, a data set, we will recognize, if you've configured it, we'll recognize new columns, and we'll add those columns to the data set. We'll infer data types, making it easier to load data into LabKey, which is always important. Also important, security. A bunch of improvements in the security department. Hopefully you've seen this in the release notes. We've improved protection for this vulnerability called CSRF, or cross-site request forgery. That's important to be aware of and to look at, especially if you are developing your own code, your own actions, Java modules, et cetera. Make sure that your modules will work with this CSRF protection in place. There's more information in the release notes. That's going to be turned on by default in 18.3. You can turn it off again if you really want to, but that'll be your last chance, 18.3, because it goes away in 19.1. And across the board, we'll protect for CSRF. Some other security improvements, API keys, the ability to specify a CAPTCHA image for if you allow for users to request signups on your site, and moderator review to prevent spammers from entering messages into your message boards. That was kind of important on labkey.org. Maybe it's important to you. All right, JavaScript. We have our modern charting facilities within LabKey, made some improvements there. What we call our domain API, we made some big improvements there. So what I mean by domain is essentially the definition of a list or a data set or a sample set or tables of that nature. The API has been improved so that we can actually, can programmatically infer the schemas, and you can create your own schemas, you can update schemas, all programmatically. So that's kind of nice. I made some improvements to LabKey SQL. Main one really is, or I think the most interesting one, common table expressions, or CTEs, which basically means that's a convenience feature, but it also enables recursive queries. So you can have queries that refer to themselves, refer to themselves, refer to themselves. The next one, this collection and analysis of usage metrics, that's not really a feature per se. That's not something you're going to open up LabKey and see and play with. But we are, in the background, collecting more usage metrics about all the instances of LabKey out there. And that's super important. So I'm Vice President of Product Strategy and Product Management, Product Planning. This gives us a lot of crucial information about what you're actually using and what you're not using. It allows us to make the right priority choices about where resources go. And that might mean your funding, that we're smarter about using your funding and not bothering to continue to support certain features that no one is using. It means our core infrastructure dollars or our own R&D goes to the places that really matter, the areas of the product that you're actually using. Investment-wise, we always spend a lot of time making sure that LabKey continues to work with the latest and greatest dependencies, so latest versions of Postgres, Tomcat, SQL Server, MySQL in the case of the last year. And then this last one is worth kind of calling out. I could probably spend half an hour talking about OpenJDK 11. Turns out tomorrow morning I'm talking for half an hour about OpenJDK 11. So if you're interested in more detail, come at 9 o'clock to the workshop and hear me talk about it. But the short version of it for now is that we've spent really the last year and a half getting LabKey compatible with the most recent versions of Java, and in particular with the open source version of the JDK. Our code was in fairly good shape, but there are a lot of dependencies that we have in a lot of different libraries. They all had to be upgraded. And in some cases, that meant changes on our side to be compatible with these new libraries. But the good news is, in 18.3, we will be compatible with OpenJDK 11. That's important just because it's the latest and greatest. It's also kind of important because Oracle is starting to charge license fees for its commercial Java runtimes. Everybody using Java in a production environment of any kind, I don't think they're making exceptions for academics, research organizations, or anything like that. If you run Java, if you run Oracle's version of the runtime, you have to pay a subscription. So I've got a lot more detail on that tomorrow if you're curious in that. All right, so we made a commitment a few years ago to our clients, or our Premium Edition customers, that LabKey would take our research and development dollars, our funding, and put it toward new capabilities in the system. Basically capabilities that, for whatever reason, an individual client wasn't interested in funding on their own. So in some cases, that's functionality that LabKey builds from scratch. In some cases, it's functionality that maybe a client has funded a portion of, enough to kind of meet their requirements and their needs. But we really need some LabKey funding to kind of augment that and turn it into a feature that's generally useful for everyone, that meets kind of all the requirements and all the needs across the community. So that's what we mean by premium investments. We're basically taking our R&D dollars and creating new capabilities in the system. And first couple of years went really well, but I'm super pleased with the last 12 months and just the amount of functionality we've been able to add to the system. Again, some of these are LabKey building from scratch. Some were funded in large part by some of you, which we always appreciate. But in all cases, LabKey is basically taking these capabilities, turning them into product features that everyone can use. So kind of running through these quickly. Toward the beginning of this year, we finished, or at least took a pause, took a milestone in the area of HIPAA, FSMA, Part 11 compliance capabilities within our system. So PHI handling, we added PHI handling, means logging and hiding of PHI for those who are not at the right security level in data sets and lists. We introduced electronic signing to help with Part 11 compliance. And it's a sub-bullet of a bullet, but we've invested a huge amount in compliant hosting. We've got our great DevOps team, Stuart and Isa, who spent a lot of time automating this whole process of being able to launch instances within AWS, and in fact, being able to launch entire compliant environments within AWS. Turns out it's pretty easy to kind of manually start up a server at Amazon. They make that pretty easy. But to really approach this from a DevOps standpoint and to automate this and to make it reproducible and really to make it compliant with a lot of those regulations is an incredibly hard job. And we're now poised to be able to do that. And I'll mention one of the examples, or sort of our first compliant hosting environment that we've developed. My next bullet point is probably the most dense bullet point I've ever written on a slide. I've kind of summed up, I don't know, two-person years worth of effort there, but we've done a huge amount of investment in the area of RStudio Pro integration, the ability to version the R engine that you're using. Super important if, for instance, you have a study, you've developed a bunch of reports under, let's say, R version 3.2, and somebody else wants to install the latest and greatest version of R, and all of your reports break. So this is the ability to say on a folder-by-folder basis, please, I just want to use this version of R for the rest of time. So that's pretty important. And then the ability to open up R coding and the ability to create our reports to a wider audience. It's pretty powerful. It's pretty interesting. A lot of people in this industry know how to program in R and can create some cool graphs and charts and reports and everything else. But previously, it was very difficult to open up the system to all of those people because it opened up some security and safety issues. So by sandboxing, by providing more granular roles within LabKey, we're allowing for more people to be able to take advantage of this functionality. So that's an example of, well, and I should mention with RStudio Pro, I think in the partner showcase, we have Phil who will be here from RStudio. If you have questions about RStudio Pro and what that, the value that can bring. So that's an example of integration with R, RStudio, et cetera. I think the next 4 bullet points are all integration points as well. So giving the ability to use Spotfire, which is a analytics and kind of charting server, giving that tool the ability to pull data from LabKey in a secure manner via JDBC. That's something we added earlier this summer. And in the same manner, we have implemented a mechanism to use ODBC against LabKey data, or in other words, to allow for clients that speak this ODBC protocol to be able to get data securely from LabKey into those clients. So Michael had mentioned the quick survey that we sent out. So we emailed a survey a couple of weeks ago to everybody on the mailing list. I hope you all got it. I hope you all responded. We're going to do that a lot more. So that was literally a one-click survey because we wanted to identify which are the clients, the ODBC-based clients that we should test with first. And Microsoft Office and Tableau Desktop were the top vote getters, so that's what we're integrating with first. And then the next 3 we'll look at in a future version of LabKey. So that's pretty exciting because the ODBC interface opens up a lot of different possibilities in terms of terms of ETL tools, in terms of analytics tools, reporting tools, et cetera. If you were here last year, you saw Nicole Villaverde present about all of the studies that Mount Sinai was running in terms of IBD, and some of the problems they had identifying that the same participant was in many of these different trials. In fact, they had lots of overlap in terms of their participants. They were running these expensive tests across the same participant multiple times. They used, in a manual way, they used this tool called OpenEMPI to identify those patients, assign them unique IDs, and kind of do the statistics to identify them and prevent that repetitive testing. And we have taken that idea and built it into LabKey, so that within the study module, you can integrate with this tool, OpenEMPI, and potentially identify patients or identify participants that are in multiple studies. You could potentially use that to keep all PHI out of your studies, but still be able to identify, or contact patients or their physicians in the case of adverse events or questionable test results. Another security item, virus checking of uploaded files. So whether it's via WebDAV or through our standard ability to add attachments to wikis and messages, issues, et cetera. We're building in the ability to integrate with ClamAV, an open source antivirus tool, and then you can configure ClamAV with the rules that you want LabKey to follow, and we will check all those attachments and prevent them from being uploaded if they don't pass your rules. So that we think is pretty important. In the kind of Amazon department, we've built the ability to use S3 as essentially a file system for the pipeline. So you can run various pipeline jobs, accessing S3, pulling data from S3 and pushing data back into S3. We've built it for excuse me, a few different types of pipeline jobs, and we'll be looking at expanding that in the future. And likewise also at Amazon. So Amazon has essentially a cloud-based data warehouse called Redshift. So if you have petabytes of data that you need to store somewhere, Redshift is a possibility, and LabKey now can treat that as an external data source, just like it can with Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, SQL Server. A bunch of improvements in the ETL department. The ability to transact a set of ETL steps, the ability to actually create these definitions via the web UI, and to use templates to make that process easier, syntax checking as well, and autocomplete within the editor to make it much easier to create these definitions. And then those are stored in the database. So used to be, before we did this, you had to write a LabKey module, had to create a LabKey module in order to create an ETL. It's no longer required. Just do it through the UI. Premium resources. This is basically a special set of documentation, essentially a knowledge base where we are collecting all of our best practices, our configurations, sample code. So compliance configurations, for instance, how LabKey.org is configured to comply with GDPR. That's one of the resources that's up there. Best practices in terms of running security scanners or configuring machines. All of this material, our experts in the services team, DevOps team, developers, we're going to put all of those resources into this premium resources knowledge base. You heard Olivia talk about file watchers. They use file watchers at SCRI to basically automate their pipelines. So that's a new capability in the last year. We've hooked that up to study and folder reload, to import of flow cytometry files, and again, this is an area where we'll continue to invest and add to the list. Generalized QC trend reports. Another example where we've had these capabilities, these types of reports hooked up to specific assays and in specific modules, Luminex, Panorama, et cetera. But this was a case where we took those specific implementations and generalized them, making them available across our general purpose assay tool. So a variety of different kind of QC plots that are now much more generally available to all kinds of assay data. And then finally, NLP workflow improvements. This again is another year's worth of work, lots of different features that we've implemented for our NLP workflow. I've highlighted just kind of two of my favorites here. One is integration with Linguamatics I2E and what we call our results comparison mode. I actually have some pretty pictures on both of those. So Linguamatics is a commercial company, commercial NLP company. We have Duncan Selwood here from Linguamatics. Talk to him at the break or whenever you see him. So we've been partnering with Linguamatics for about the last 2 years. We officially announced this last week, press release. But basically, it's a perfect combination. LabKey has a document processing pipeline, workflow, and a curation user interface to assist and to help with the process of natural language processing, with taking text documents and turning them into data that can be analyzed and queried and reported. We don't actually do natural language processing. Folks like Linguamatics do that. And so Linguamatics has basically created the integration piece to allow their engine to plug into our pipeline. So you can use Linguamatics to extract all the data and then use our workflow and our curation UI to adjudicate or review or to edit that data further. So that kind of looks like this. This is our results comparison mode. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing a text document here. Let's say it's a pathology report. This is a fake one, don't worry. And here you see that an NLP engine, let's say I2E, has extracted these values. A human abstractor has selected these values, and then an adjudicator can choose, adjudicate that and choose the appropriate answer or change that answer to what it should be. And we're showing an example of 2 sets of results here, but you can have any number of results here. So let's say you had a couple of NLP engines that you want to compare with each other and a couple of human abstractors who are also doing this. I need to mention Biologics because it's a super important piece for us. We released our Biologics registration product last year. You've heard Kira talk about it. Our friends from Just are here. They're our partners in the development process. And based on their feedback and the feedback of the other Biologics customers, we have made a bunch of improvements. A couple of the key ones, we've added an experiment framework to allow for organizing the data, organizing samples and other data in intelligent ways. Kira mentioned media registration and the challenges there. I think we've listened to Kira and we've listened to the other clients, and we've really improved that capability as well. And in general, with I think you met Matt Y earlier today, with user tests and good design principles, he's helped us, and our developers have improved the user interface in general within the product to make it much more usable. And I've mentioned trial and how that might be interesting to some of you. Well, we just, as of yesterday, launched our Biologics trial. So you can go to labkey.org, you can click the button, and you get your own instance of LabKey Biologics to check out this particular application, this particular product, and how it works and what it does. So I encourage you to do so. Another kind of case study here that I wanted to mention. So Zach Weiner from Harvard Pilgrim is here. He'll be in the partner showcase as well. This is a system that Harvard Pilgrim developed with help from us and from another technology partner, funded by the FDA. Some of us talked about this a little bit in the mobile app data collection, birds of a feather. But basically what you're seeing here is, well, it's a very high-level diagram, obviously, but patients here have a mobile app. So patients are recruited by a healthcare provider to participate in a study. And they are given a special code that they enter in their phone. They download that app. And based on that, the app will load the appropriate study metadata associated with that. So essentially a set of surveys and questionnaires that form that study. And they will submit responses on a weekly or monthly basis to this LabKey server that collects responses. And then a data analyst at that provider has the ability to pull those responses periodically through the LabKey API into their secure environment. So they might use SAS, they might use R, they might use some other tool, but they pull that data in and merge it, join it with their clinical health records of those patients that they signed up for this process. So the cool thing here is that this environment is running in AWS in a HIPAA FISMA compliant manner. LabKey's running that environment, and it's set up to host any number of studies. The app is fully configurable by the metadata supplied by this web app down here, the study designer. The response environment, the LabKey server response environment, will adapt itself in terms of the schema to whatever it needs to in terms of each of those questionnaires. So this is running and available for for folks here. If you have a need to collect data from patients, from individuals via mobile app, talk to Zach or me or other LabKey people. All right, so I know what you're saying. Well, what's coming next? What could you possibly do to top that? So first of all, we recognize, we need to do more usability improvements. We made good strides last year in terms of the UX redesign, but we recognize that we need to do more in the way of usability. And I started actually listing a couple of my pet peeves and the things that I think we'll fix in the next year. But really, what the important thing is really that these surveys that we're going to be sending, the usage metrics that I mentioned, user testing, and other mechanisms to gather this feedback, and of course the all-important kind of one-on-one conversations we have here and all through the year. That's going to lead us to figure out the important areas that we need to fix in terms of usability. So make your opinions known. We track this. In general, I would say, we're trying to be more scientific about the changes that we make, when we make them, where we put our resources, where we put your resources, to make sure we're addressing the most important needs. But there are some things we're pretty sure we're going to be doing in 2019. This is where I kind of break out my crystal ball and make some predictions based on what I've heard from you, what we didn't quite get done in the last year. But I think it's pretty clear we're going to make a lot of investments in sample management in general. And so we have a couple of mechanisms right now in terms of sample sets, in terms of specimen repository. They're good and bad in both of those things, but we're going to look at really improving and revamping the way that you manage samples within LabKey. And that's kind of related to that is the idea of provenance and lineage. This sort of goes in a lot of different areas. So biologics, very important. Sample management, very important. Even provenance in the way of assay pipelines and files and everything else. We're hearing this common theme of the need to kind of track lineage and track where did things come from and where did they go and how did they split and join and everything else. So we're looking at making a lot of investments in that area. I was very pleased with, as you heard, the premium functionality we got completed in the last year. We didn't make as much progress on ontology support as I wanted to. So I'm putting on the slide now and saying we're going to do that next year. Because it is super important. We talked about it in one of the birds of the feather, and we hear it quite a bit from our clients that hooking LabKey up to these various ontologies and having the ability to kind of filter and constrain and map to ontologies is very important. I mentioned the analytics tools integrations that we've done so far. I expect we're going to do more of those. And they'll become easier as we do, as we get the first ones done and we kind of refine the ODBC interface that we've built. So we're going to look at kind of expanding the suite of tools that LabKey can talk to, because that's important, and you've told us. Pipeline automation integration, I've mentioned that, just expanding pipelines in the clouds, expanding the ability to use file watchers. And then, as we always do, we invest heavily every year in underlying technologies, in process, in dependencies. So a few things, as most of you have noticed, we have been migrating slowly to GitHub. All new modules at this point get created in GitHub, and we're moving some of the older modules from Subversion into GitHub. I don't guarantee that we're getting rid of Subversion next year, but we're going to make a big push toward GitHub for sure. Some of these dependencies, some of them will be fairly straightforward. Postgres 11. Hopefully the follow-on JDK releases 12 and 13 will both come out in the next year. Hopefully those are fairly straightforward. Selenium 3, this is a testing framework that we use extensively. Bigger investment there, and we kind of need to get to Selenium 3 for various improvements in terms of browser support and performance and reliability of our testing framework, which is key. And the last thing I'll mention is we are looking at our own internal processes. So as you probably know, we run on a Scrum process, a monthly Scrum process, which is pretty efficient. If we talk to you and prioritize a feature for you in the middle of 1 month, by the end of the next month, we've got a sprint build that we're delivering to you with that feature in it, which is pretty good. I mean, I don't know if there are a lot of commercial software companies that you work with that give you that kind of turnaround. But we're actually looking at ways that we might reduce that span. We might be able to give you things within a week or 2 weeks, or on a faster cadence. So we're looking at this development methodology called Kanban, which allows us to be a little more incremental in terms of, a little more fluid in terms of how we design and spec and implement and test functionality that ultimately goes into LabKey. So, but the idea is to give you those features faster, because you've told us and you keep telling us you need those features. You need capabilities to be able to do what you do. So that's what we're looking at.